Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural session of the ICTM Dialogues. We are so happy and honored that so many of our colleagues are participating in this session. I would like to first call on Salwa El-Shawan Castello-Branco, the president of ICTM, to say a few words and to launch the series of dialogues. Salwa, over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this inaugural session towards decolonization of music and dance studies, which is a central concern for all of us in the ICTM and has been the subject of many dispersed discussions, including among board members. So I'm particularly delighted to open the first of this ongoing series that will take place throughout the year. This is the first initiative of its kind in the ICTM. We've never organized a series that will take place throughout the year, involving so many colleagues from different parts of the world as organizers, as presenters, and of course, all of you who are present here. So I'm really looking forward, as I'm sure all of you are, to hear and to learn from your experiences, your reflections, your interrogations on a subject that is so central in today's music and dance research. And I'm sure that by the end of this year, we will all have moved a step forward, perhaps several steps forward, I hope. As you know, our focus today is on Latin America, specifically on questions of social inclusion, community musics, ethnicities, and identities. And I won't present the sessions. Obviously, it will be the chair who will do this. However, I would like to take advantage of this moment to thank the chair, the organizer, Juan Sebastián Rojas, and the moderator, Julio Mendivil, and all of the presenters for being involved and launching this first inaugural sessions. Future sessions will bring other perspectives from different parts of the world, other experiences, and I'm really looking forward to all of them. And I hope that as many of you can join us. Of course, preparing this has been a huge endeavor. And we are all indebted to Sui Beng Tan for her hard work, for her conceptualization, for her ideas, for her initiative, and for being in touch with so many people. And many thanks as well to the committee who has worked hard with Sui Beng and for selecting all of these wonderful sessions that we are going to enjoy and learn from over the next month. So many thanks to all of you, and I look forward to hearing and to learning and to discussing all of these central issues that bring us together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salwa. An important goal for the dialogues is to share the different ways of decolonizing music and dance studies in different languages and in various parts of the globe. And we deeply appreciate all the diverse and excellent proposals that came in. And we regret that we could not accept all. Yeah. So I would like to thank all those who worked so hard to see the dialogues happen, especially my committee members, Larry, Marsha, Sylvia, Umimala, Jean, Kathy, Susanna, Irene, and Zhi. And thanks to Carlos and Eric who will co-host the sessions for the rest of the year. Before I pass the floor to Julio Mendivil, the moderator of the first session, let me just quickly read a few reminders. One, all presentations and live discussions will be recorded and will be made available on the ICTM website for those who are unable to synchronously present. Two, except for the presenters, your microphones will be muted upon joining the session. Please keep it muted unless you have been invited by the moderator to ask a question or to make a comment. And if you wish to speak, please write a request in the chat function and wait for the moderator's invitation. Thanks again, everybody. Over to you, Julio Mendivil, to introduce your presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And thank you very much also, Carlos, for hosting. It is a pleasure for me to be part of the first dialogue as moderator. I would say that ethnomusicology is a dialogue-based discipline. When we go to the field, we speak with our informants, we have to deal with conversations and with interviews. Dialogue is a very important point for the field work and for the ethnomusicological work. And for this reason, I think it is very important for us to keep in contact in so difficult times like these moments that we are living now with the pandemic. I want to thank Juan Sebastián Rojas and Jesse Vallejo and Agenor Vasconcelos for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And we will see three different presentations. The first one by Agenor Cavalcanti de Vasconcelos and from the Universidade Federal do Amazonas in Brazil. And he will show us his research in the Amazonian region from Brazil. Then we will see a presentation by Juan Sebastián Rojas about migration from music in Colombia, migrants in Bogota. Juan Sebastián is coming from the Fundación Universitaria Juan Corpas from Colombia. And the last presentation will be Jesse Vallejo from the music department in Colipola, Pomona, and she will speak us about music education and mariachis in the USA. We will see three different cases, and I would say that these different cases speak about migration of people, migration of musical instruments, and migration of knowledge. And when we speak about migration, we are speaking all the time also on hierarchies of power between cultures and between people, and also between musical instruments and peoples, and or some, for example, between different kind of knowledge. It is very interesting to see the different approaches we will see, and I would say we can begin directly with a presentation of the presentations. The first one by Agenor Cavalcanti de Vasconcelos. I don't know if you want to say something about your presentation, Agenor, before we show your presentation.
No, hello everybody. I just want to introduce myself. I am here, and I have one concern about if Ari Ataikoema is listening. Ari, você está escutando? This is my collaborator, and it's the first time he is in a Zoom meeting. But it's just a video. It's just a video. We can start with then, and after I think I can answer the questions. The city of São Gabriel da Cachoeira, state of Amazonas, presents proportionally the largest indigenous population in Brazil. According to the Rio Negro Federations of Indigenous Organizations, there are more than 22 different ethno-linguistic groups that speak variations of 5 main linguistic groups: Aruac, Eastern Tucano, Yanomami, Macu, and Nhangatu. During 4 months, I carried out fieldwork among indigenous musicians from the city who are specialists in a genre of local popular music. Here I will speak about 2 indigenous people. According to Yepamaçã and Baré cosmology, also in literature and fieldwork, the body of the mythological personage Jurupari would be composed entirely of musical instruments. Controlling the musical instruments by which Jurupari presents himself is a way of reviving indigenous thinking about music, not only in the conceptual aspects of their cosmology, but also in the directions of the popular music practices. This sense that popular music provides is political because it rearticulates indigenous practice and thoughts, which have resisted from the colonial times for more than 500 years. In thesis, popular music in the Cuximawara theme of the Brazilian Amazon Northwestern presents an inclusive space where indigenous peoples' practices, expressions, and thoughts have been dealt. How electronic keyboards, amplified sound system, guitars, and other modern instruments have been related to the concepts of Baré indigenous music. According to the data that I have obtained since 2013, during fieldwork in São Gabriel da Cachoeira city, I intended to clarify the idea that through the popular music practice among indigenous people living in that municipality, they still live the relationship between indigenous myth and music. This relationship is recurrent in anthropological works about indigenous music in many cultural lowland South America contexts. The objective here is to show how this relationship manifests itself among the natives who are dedicated to this local popular music genre, called Cuximawara. In this sense, Cuximawara is popular, commercial, radio and phonographic industrial music assimilated in São Gabriel da Cachoeira natives cultural context. In a superficial ethnographic layer, indigenous musicians reproduce a repertoire of Brazilian, Colombian, and Venezuelan style songs, forró, merengue, and cumbia. The mastery of that vast repertoire, the improvisation's ability, the lyrics composing, and the musical performance, as well as the special ability to play until the sun comes up, are the goals of the Cuximawara musician theme. These practices are similar to what is described in the anthropological literature that approach aspects of practice and musical compositions and shamanisms in various American indigenous contexts. I present here the data that came up during record sessions and tour with Ari Ataicuema. Ari is a Baré indigenous popular musician born in Fonte Boa community, nearby São Gabriel da Cachoeira, capital city. His artistic name includes the Baré expression Ataicuema, that means until the sun rises. His name expresses one of the Jurupari teachings. We record in partnership one CD of Cuximawara. It is on Spotify. Living with Ari and his parentes emerged the first relations about the indigenous myth and the process of popular music. In another way, the Baré cosmological knowledge and its connection to Cuximawara popular music. In the São Gabriel indigenous musical perspective, there is a continuum logical that connects all the instruments of the world through the Jurupari myth. I explained these relations in my thesis, with some help from the available and published mythical narratives. Jurupari was born like an imperfect human being yet, with this body full of holes. As he moved, the wind vibrated through these holes, so he was pure music, explained me Gabriel Sodré Maia. Musical instruments formed his body. His hand was the cariço flute, his arm the japurutu flute, his leg was the jurupari flute. Thus, all the jurupari organs and members were musical instruments. That includes guitars and keyboards because his body is the origin of all musical knowledge. In this mythical time, Jurupari was the first animator of the parties and dances. As Bruce da Silva work states, Jurupari flogged those who did not want to dance. It is presented on all these region festivities, not just in the sacred rituals of initiation. All Kushimawara parties that I attended lasted until the following morning. This was a very serious commitment taken among the musicians and the audience. Like I said, that commitment Ari carries in his name. In these mythical narratives, Jurupari is not only responsible for the feasts but also the legislator. According to the indigenous belief, women cannot see the sacred flutes because they may become sick and even die. The expression Jurupari law, formulated by Hermano Stradelli, is famous and much commented in the anthropological ethnomusicological literature. Graciliano Lana explained this visual band capital law as a follow. Women who see these instruments becoming poor and diseased and must be eliminated. After teaching all about music, dance and parties, Jurupari was followed by some children. He does not return to human conviviality and kills himself. In the place where he died, a pashuba palm tree was grown. The narratives claim that the Jurupari came from this palm tree. It is from flutes and other percussive instruments are made. Thus, it is clear that the palm tree is not only the raw material of the instruments, but Jurupari's incarnation. But Jurupari is not just in the sacred flutes. He is the head of the feasts and dance as well as the head of the instruments. It is his presence on earth still in a mythological time according to this indigenous perspective that talks music to men. In this sense, not only the sacred, traditional, have the Jurupari's presence, but all the instruments. For this reason, a lot of musical instruments are benzidos, blessed in São Gabriel da Cachoeira by indigenous musicians, such as electronic keyboards, electric guitars, and others. The Bassamori, that means musical instrument sacred set, encompasses in its logical all the instruments, include the Western ones, those that white men have made. Justino Tuyuca, a study group partner, narrated a scene that explained the relevance of Bassamori in the popular music practices, the arrival of amplified speakers in the community where he was born in Colombia. He told me that around 1968, when his mother first heard the amplified sound system play cumbia and merengues at the thin volume, she got quite intrigued and preferred to keep the same visual ban posed by Jurupari, that is imposed on all women and children in Tuyuca culture in the sacred flute rituals. Justino's mother preferred to maintain no eye contact with the source of such low bass frequency. I tried to tell little stories that I have learned during my field work in São Gabriel da Cachoeira contemporary music scene. In these stories, I was taken by the interlocutors to meet the true music of region. It was presented to me as the Kushimawara music. In places where I have been and could experience the song, sometimes it was also referred as a dance. In this dance hall, as well as among the musicians and singers, what I witnessed was a great interaction among the indigenous people of the Upper Rio Negro, and the dance was mediated by the popular music. Popular music practiced among indigenous people from the Upper Rio Negro region, especially among the musicians and the audience of Kushimawara local genre, provides a cultural space for reflection and diffusion of indigenous thoughts about music. Rather than a destruction of the culture, the sophisticated Barrett thugs encompass and explain everything around them. Thus, it is understood the guitar, the electronic keyboards, and other instruments as they leave Jurupari body. Therefore, it is not very important if the instrument is made in USA, made in Japan, or made in Austria. Before that, it is understood all the musical instruments are made in Jurupari. The records that we have made together provide an idea for professional research while allowing everyone access to the results of the thesis. In this sense, it must be taken into account that this work proposes a political agenda as it gives visibility to one of the most marginalized songs on the planet. Thank you a lot. See you.
Só tem curumi, panema, pescador de ano já. Marupiara, como eu não há. Só tem curumi, panema, pescador de ano já. Eu sou caboclo, nascido no Rio Negro, e me orgulho de ser aqui do Beiradão. Feliz eu vivo, caço e pesco de canoa, eu e a patroa vou sair pra passear. Tem aracu, surubim pra muquiar, tucunaré, piraíba e jacundá. Tem caititu, vaca e tamanduá. Se você não acredita, vai lá ver no Muquentá. Marupiara, como eu não há. Só tem curumi, panema, pescador de ano já. Marupiara, como eu não há. Só tem curumi, panema, pescador de ano já. Eu sou caboclo, nascido no Rio Negro, e me orgulho de ser aqui do Beiradão. Feliz eu vivo, caço e pesco de canoa, eu e a patroa.
Thank you very much, Agenor, for your presentation. If you have some questions, please write your question for the discussion. We go to the next presentation, the next video by Juan Sebastián Rojas and his collaborators. We have a special case from migration within Colombia, and it's very interesting to see how music, ritual music, moved from coast region to the capital in Bogota. Juan Sebastián, I don't know if you want to say something to your video.
Thank you, Julio. Not really. We would just want to let the presentation roll, and then we'll be ready for comments, discussion, questions, etc. Thank you. Hello, my name is Juan Sebastián Rojas, and it is an honor for me to co-present today with Arturo Prado, who is the leader of the sociocultural process that this research is about. Today we're going to be talking about the Santoral, or patron saint wake, in honor to the Virgin of Atocha, from the town of Barbacoas in the Pacific region of Colombia. This celebration has been nowadays transplanted to the Andean city of Bogotá. Afro-Colombian communities, migrants, and forcibly displaced population have been bringing these traditional cultural expressions to the city and performing them there since 1992. So, this is a Catholic celebration, but for centuries now it has been adopted by Afro-Colombian populations and it has been fashioned their way. So, this is a Saint Wake that involves traditional drums, traditional singing, and is a celebration that lasts 2 days, and usually, you're supposed to stay all night long. So it's a very involved ritual situation. So what we are going to be discussing today is how traditional cultural expressions from Afro-Colombian communities in the diaspora can help build social cohesion and a sense of community among migrants, sometimes using the existing framework or the emerging framework of cultural policies.
Muy buenas, soy Arturo Prado, artista y gestor cultural de la colonia barbacoana residente en Bogotá, al igual de todo el proceso que fomenta la corporación folclórica Candombeo y Color. Quiero hacer remembranzas sobre las fiestas patronales que se realizan en Barbacoas, Nariño, donde la patrona de la Virgen de Atocha, años tras año, todos los 15 de agosto, se le rinde homenaje allá en dicho municipio. Al igual que aquí en Bogotá, nosotros los residentes desde la colonia barbacoana y otros invitados especiales hacemos también un recorderi para no olvidar ese acervo cultural y ancestral que día a día dejaron o han dejado nuestros antepasados. A esas fiestas patronales se le suma el velorio santoral, donde es el espacio que se aglomera todos los invitados, todos los coterráneos que llegan a formar parte de este proceso identitario y cultural para no olvidar. Este velorio santoral tiene algunos momentos, entre ellos el espacio adecuado para que la gente nuestra llegue y se sienta cómodo. Luego se hace la misa, una misa solemne. Enseguida buscamos el grupo musical con las cantoras, que ellas interpretan nuestros arrullos y los músicos interpretan dentro del formato instrumental cununo, bombo, guasá y esa voz que enaltece dentro de cada estrofa a nuestra Virgen o patrona Virgen de Atocha. Luego tocamos hacemos la parte de la entrega de nuestra bebida, entre ella el café y por ende también nuestra bebida típica, que es el chapil, un aguardiente de caña que se realiza que se elabora tradicionalmente en nuestro territorio. A las 12 de la noche se hace el Santo Rosario en honor a nuestra Virgen, donde paulatinamente se acercan los asistentes a hacer sus peticiones a nombre de la Virgen de Atocha. A las 2 de la mañana se le entrega a cada uno de los presentes el plato típico, ya sea pusandao o tapao, para fortalecer un poco y avivar un poco más el estar en ese espacio ritual que es la conexión directa con nuestra santa patrona y madre.
So, what we see here is that wakes and arrullos are complex ritual settings in which many elements are taking place, and all these elements are there for a reason and they make sense for a reason as well. What we argue here is that arrullos and wakes are ritual spaces that are structured around performance, affective, and expressive mechanisms that facilitate active participation. And this is really important because this active participation is actually what enables deeper affective experiences, which ultimately have an impact in elastic processes of identity construction. See? I will break this down in a second. So these elastic processes of identity construction actually enable the resignification of space and territory in a city that has a historically racist background. So ultimately, arrullos and these sort of rituals are a way of creating enough common ground, enough commonality among Afro-Colombian participants so that a common, elastic Afro-Colombian identity is constructed, an identity of being Afro-Colombian from the Pacific region. So, this is just to note that this celebration is specifically from barbacoas, but the affective devices that Arturo just narrated are present in many other patron saint celebrations in the region. Therefore, we can consider these affective mechanisms that enable the construction of a common identity in Bogotá. Some of these mechanisms that help build that deep affective experience are the long duration of the ritual. You're supposed to spend all night there. The loud and repetitive groovy sound of drums and cyclic chanting, right? So this is also that after hours starts turning into a little bit of a trance atmosphere. Collective prayer and invocation is another one of those elements that is present in specific ritual moments throughout the night. And same with the role and function of altars, food, and traditional liquor. This liquor is brought over from the region because it's a very specific marker of regional identity as well. So what we see here is that, many of these rituals are similar, but they are not the same. But the way they happen in Bogotá work to construct elastic Afro-Colombian identities that enable the creation of a sense of community, of this marginalized community in the diaspora. So differences are overlooked in favor of the sense of commonality. And this is very important because these processes of identity construction in time, it has been 30 years, have also enabled empowerment of Afro-Colombian cultural leaders in diverse ways in the city of Bogotá. Let us watch a short video from the Atochita Saint Wake from 2018.
En este espacio, dentro de todo lo que se viene haciendo en honor a nuestra Santa y Madre Virgen de Atocha, sirve de base para que cada líder afrodescendiente se fortalezca y pueda, de una u otra forma, crear otros espacios para las expresiones artísticas como la música, la danza, el teatro, la pintura y el canto. Estos compañeros que han creado estas escuelas de formación sirve para que nuestros hijos, ¿sí?, de pigmentación oscura y otros invitados tengan las puertas abiertas para que también conozcan y sepan de qué manera nuestros líderes son capaces de dar a conocer y de demostrar que nuestro acervo cultural aún se encuentra vigente desde cada una de estas corrientes artísticas. Esto ha servido para la unidad, para la hermandad en cada uno de nuestros hermanos afro radicados en la ciudad de Bogotá. El velorio santoral se hace en Bogotá ya que ha servido de un asentamiento profundo y adecuado, quizás porque la gente que ha zarpado, que ha salido de nuestro territorio a esta ciudad, hemos logrado no olvidar, no perder esas costumbres que nos unen cada día, cada vez más frente a ese sentimiento cultural que es emanado por nuestros antepasados y, por qué no, para mantener ese legado aquí en este territorio.
Despite 30 years of history that show that these celebrations do create spaces for community cohesion and for constructing a sense of belonging in the capital city of Bogotá for Afro-Colombian migrants and victims of the armed conflict, there are still questions about the emancipatory and activist nature of this initiative. For example, when these initiatives started, they were not funded. They were just driven by the need of migrants and Afro-Colombian community members in Bogotá to conduct these important ritual practices. But around the 2000s, the cultural policy framework in Colombia changed, actually since the 1990s, and now a multicultural cultural policy framework is dominant. So now, culturally diverse expressions are being accounted for within cultural budgets in cities such as Bogotá. So now, Arturo has formalized his organization, the cultural corporation Candombeo y Color, and the Virgin of Atocha Saint Way receives funding from the local district to conduct the celebration. So this is a good thing, because now it's established, it's stable, and it's part of the larger cultural narrative of such a big city like Bogotá, which is around 10 million inhabitants. But on the other hand, you can't help but wonder if this is not also a sort of co-option of this kind of ritual, or a way of embracing a utilitarian approach to cultural diversity. So, what is the arrullo to the Virgin of Atocha ultimately? Is it a ritual for Afro-Colombian communities that deeply enacts and reaffirms a sense of belonging and a sense of commonality and identity with a particular social group? Or is it simply part of the cultural and ethnic programming of a culturally diverse city such as Bogotá? So with that question, we want to finish our short presentation, and we will gladly expand on any of these or other topics during the discussion section. And thank you very much.
Hello, Carlos. Carlos, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
I have a problem with my connection. I would say Jesse could begin with the presentation. I have to leave for a short time because I'm having problem with the connection.
Okay, and I'll just point out that Flora is connected in a separate location, and so, but we're ready to roll the tape, and we're happy to see everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Buenos días y buenas tardes a todos. Our portion of this panel will discuss mariachi music in educational settings, focusing on its context in Los Angeles and how mariachi music can help people strengthen their sense of self and their relationships with peers and mentors. My name is Jessie Vallejo, and I mostly identify as Chicana or Mexican, Italian, American. I am currently a professor at Cal Poly Pomona, where I teach mariachi and ethnomusicology courses. Mariachi music has been central to how I've connected with part of my family, learned Spanish, and created a supportive social and professional network, especially since beginning graduate school. These bonds have continued after graduating, and they still shape my work as a professor and mentor to my students.
My name is Guillermo Willy Acuña, and I identify as American of Mexican descent. I have been a professional musician in the Los Angeles area for 18 years and currently play harp for Mariachi Sol de Mexico de José Hernández. I give harp workshops and clinics throughout the southwestern region for the purpose of advancing the harp as an integral part of the mariachi ensemble. I met Dr. Vallejo as an undergrad while attending the UCLA Mariachi Ensemble, Mariachi de Uclatlan.
Hello, my name is Flora Delgado. I'm a civil engineering student at Cal Poly Pomona. More importantly, I identify as Chicana and Indigenous. I was born into a family of Chichimeca stick dancers and have been in mariachi for the past 14 years. I transferred into Cal Poly 3 years ago, and this is when I met Dr. Vallejo through auditioning to be in Mariachi Los Broncos at the beginning of my time at Cal Poly.
First, we want to recognize that many of the terms we use in this presentation, such as Latino, Latine, Latinx, Hispanic, URM, etc., are imperfect and often debated. For brevity today, we are using the terms as they are popularly used within the context of the United States. Mariachi music is a regional style of string, vocal, and brass music from the central western part of Mexico that became nationalized and standardized through Mexico's film industry beginning in 1936. As Lauren Salazar outlines in her dissertation from 2011, mariachi music has been incorporated into school and college programs since the 1960s across the Southwest, but it is only more recently that interest has increased in formalizing mariachi classes and programs, somewhat similar to how jazz began being integrated into American school programs. The early inclusion of mariachi music in schools followed the civil rights and Chicano movements of the mid-20th century, but unlike jazz, mariachi has been slower to be as widely adopted, perhaps because of assumptions and stereotypes surrounding what constitutes quote-unquote American music from the United States that is quote-unquote worthy of a study in a formal educational context. For example, historian Natalia Molina's work on racial scripts helps explain some of the ambiguities and inconsistencies surrounding Latinx and also Asian identities in the United States, and how Latinos and Asians are often assumed to be categorically not from quote-unquote America or the United States. Today, however, people who are labeled as Hispanic or Latina, Latinx, Latino in the United States make up the largest minority group, and people of Mexican descent represent the largest percentage of Latinos in the country. Following increased racial tensions in 2015, including anti-Mexican sentiments, among many others, that have permeated the national discourse, I have noticed how mariachi music has been embraced, in part, as a response from people who want to distance themselves from this wave of overt racism, or also to push back in order to celebrate one's Latinx heritage. As a result, mariachi continues to be sought after as an ideal Latin American musical style for school programs aiming to diversify their offerings, include Spanish language content, and in some cases, respond to community demand and student activism. Cal Poly Pomona is a Hispanic Serving Institution, or HSI, a designation that entitles universities to federal funding based on student enrollment. The minimum requirements are that there are at least 25% Latinos and 50% low-income students enrolled. Until recently, little has been researched about how these funds are used to serve students, and scholars have highlighted inconsistencies with programming and a general lack of supportive and cultural initiatives on HSI-designated campuses. In her 2019 book, Gina Garcia argues that many HSIs could be categorized as Hispanic enrolling institutions, outlining areas of improvement for serving students in culturally sensitive ways that improve the social climate for everyone and move beyond just having a minimum enrollment. Other recent studies discuss how multicultural centers and ethnic studies classes provide necessary supportive spaces that can improve campus climate and foster positive changes in students' identities and experiences. For example, see Garcia Puceteri's 2019 dissertation and Gutierrez-Keaton, Benavides Lopez, and Aguilar Hernandez's 2021 article. Based on these studies, diversifying campus programming and course offerings can significantly improve the climate and positively impact students' personal and professional growth. Despite the positive impacts of these spaces, more is still needed to broadly decolonize our curriculums, acknowledge students' cultural knowledge they contribute to academia, and also to avoid burdening centers and singular departments and the many Black, Indigenous, and people of color faculty and staff who tend to work in those areas with, quote-unquote, fixing all of the historical issues alone for the entire campus. For music departments, adding an ensemble like a mariachi group is one possibility of expanding the curriculum to better reflect community knowledge while still reaching the main objectives of a music department, such as teaching technical proficiency on an instrument, developing sight reading skills, or improvisation and oral skills in general, which would prepare students for a successful musical career. It is necessary, however, that a careful and sensitive approach is taken to ensure that an ensemble like a mariachi is holistically included in the curriculum, and program leaders should be aware of the risks of a cultural tax, the exploitation or tokenization of underrepresented minority students and faculty, as well as Black, Indigenous, and people of color students and faculty, and they should be aware of the risks of unequal access to resources. When there is pushback against or there's hesitation in adding an ensemble like mariachi music, it's usually because educational program leaders worry that students will not receive the quote-unquote high-quality training expected of college music graduates. And this is often due to a general lack of awareness about what skills are required and developed in something like mariachi music and how they complement what's taught in academic music programs.
Often, cultural world music genres take a back seat in the minds of most audiences as being a lesser art than traditional Western classical music. In reality, these differences are based in their performative context and adaptive skill set. For example, in classical music, sight reading a sheet of music is a high marker for one's musicianship, whereas with mariachi music, the ability to transpose a piece of music on the spot as an ensemble is much more valuable in a typical performance setting. Audience participation in a concert hall is often frowned upon as a sign of disrespect to the performers and other audience members. However, in mariachi, depending on the venue and performance context, say public stage versus a wedding mass, the audience is often encouraged to be vocal and expressive about what they are listening to and often sing along.
At Cal Poly Pomona, our mariachi ensemble, and essentially my job, are the result of years of student activism. Currently, we are still one of a small handful of California college-based mariachi classes, and most campus mariachis are student clubs. Only 2 campuses have classes that are run by full-time faculty dedicated to mariachi. One is in Chula Vista in Southern California near San Diego, and the other is the program at Cal Poly Pomona. The CPP Mariachi Ensemble meets twice a week, and students are able to repeat the class every term, which allows students to regularly connect with peers from across campus disciplines and foster long-term familiarity and friendships among students that endure even with alumni, who often return to visit during special events and semesterly concerts. In addition to our required department concerts, which serve as final exams for the class, we also perform regularly to support the multicultural centers on campus, as well as student clubs and the broader community.
Personally, my experience at Cal Poly has been enriched by taking part in mariachi. Being in the engineering department, I noticed there's a big push towards networking and fraternizing within the engineering discipline. It almost feels like the goal is to have us all assimilate into this engineering-centric identity. But coming in as someone who had an identity deeply rooted in my culture, I found it really alienating. Having a place where there were similarly minded people made it easier for me to feel at home in my academic life. I also spent a few semesters involved in another musical ensemble, but my experience there was not as positive as in the mariachi. In this class, there were occasions the professor pushed students to cry in class, as well as instances of some problematic comments that were borderline racist. Because of this, I think it's important for the department to listen to the students about their experiences with professors so that they can support ensembles that promote a positive environment for students.
Mariachi music in a classroom setting. oftentimes is the only way people can access learning about mariachi music. Even kids who identify ethnically as Mexican or coming from Mexican American families are no longer really culturally Mexican. So mariachi is this way for them to sort of reach back into their family histories and reconnect with their parents and their grandparents. Most of us who consider ourselves pochos, right, being born in the U.S. but coming from Mexican families, it's a bit of a struggle to sort of transition into trying to understand what this music is, because for the most part, we don't grow up with it. It's the Beatles versus Vicente Fernandez,
I want to add that these ensembles help foster a sense of community and respect among students who do not identify as having Mexican heritage or even Latin American heritage. For example, students in my ensemble have also identified as Filipino, Chinese, Taiwanese, German, Irish, Vietnamese, and more. Students often join because they are curious about the music, and this is frequently because of a personal relationship with a friend or partner who identifies as having Mexican roots. Others join to practice their instrument in another style or work on improving their Spanish. In my personal experience, this is similar to how I began learning about Chinese music and studying the erhu. I had a friend who invited me to sit in on a rehearsal. Regardless of the students' backgrounds, I have observed how members of the ensemble develop a better sense of self, grow as musicians, and find ways to cultivate cross-cultural tolerance, respect, and appreciation for each other, which we all know is needed so much during these times right now. Thank you all for listening to our panel. Here's a list of our cited resources in case you are interested in them. Acá dejamos la información de nuestras fuentes en caso de que les interesan. Muchas gracias a todos por su atención en este panel.
Thank you very much for your video, Jesse, Willie, and Flora. Thank you also, Juan, Sebastián, and Arturo, and Agenor, and Ari for your inputs. And I would say we can come to our discussion. Before we begin to discuss with our audience, I would say we can discuss between us a little bit about some issues which are relevant for us, such inclusion and also intersectionality. I think this is a very important point for the cases we have seen. As I said, we have three cases, and we can see the migration of persons or musical instruments of the migration of knowledge. And in every situation, we can also see the hierarchies between cultures and between languages, for example, or musical traditions, or we can see also the hierarchies between musical instruments, like Agenor shown. I would say that a common aspect in the three cases we have seen is also the role of the ethnomusicology as a discipline which try to mediate between cultures, between different persons, between different cultures, between different musical traditions. And in this sense, I want to ask you three, or you and Arturo and Willie and Flora and Ari, what do you think is this what is the special role for ethnomusicology in such situations? What is the post-colonial or decolonial input which are you trying to show here with these videos? I don't know if someone from us will begin with discussion.
I can begin if you want.
Mm-hmm.
We can ask for Ari, for example, what he think about my research to understand. Ari, você tá aí, cara? Você consegue... Ari, a pergunta que surgiu aqui foi assim, né, traduzindo, qual a importância, assim, de uma pesquisa como essa que eu fiz? Como é que tu vê essa importância, né? Se tem alguma importância lá para a música Cuximauara?
Eu já não entendi direito aqui não, tá? Mas pode repetir a pergunta aí para mim?
Posso. Qual a importância dessa pesquisa que a gente fez para a música Cuximauara?
Ah, tá, legal. Assim, cara, eu te digo assim porque há muito tempo que esse estilo musical, ela, assim, como é que eu posso explicar? Ela dificilmente foi divulgado, entendeu? Foi divulgado. Então, com essa tua ida lá para São Gabriel, até aquele nosso encontro lá, as nossas conversas, então ela pouco era divulgada. Ali era uma coisa que interna somente, só ali em São Gabriel e nos interiores, entendeu? Assim, ela não tinha uma oportunidade de expandir, ir para outros cantos, que nem está acontecendo agora com esses estudos, com essas pesquisas que fizemos lá.
Beleza. I try to traduce for the audience. We're talking about the visibility of in this case of Cuximauara music, the important role of the ethnomusicology, the visibility and the try to expand the visibility of the local genre. They talked how when we begin the research, nobody talk about Cuximauara music, and now everybody are interested about this music in local context. I have to make a big translation for the question, Julio. I'm sorry if it's not, but I try to.
Yes, it is okay. I think if everyone knows we are speaking with our accent, with our limitations in English, and with our kind of decolonizing the English language, and everything is okay, I think. Yeah. Thank you, Ari. Juan Sebastián?
Yes, I think actually the way Agenor just moved the question was great. So if it's no problem, I would like to make the same question to Arturo here.
Yeah, so, of course.
Arturo, entonces la pregunta sería básicamente, ¿usted por qué considera que la investigación que hicimos, pues sobre todo que hice yo del proceso en el que usted trabaja, es importante? ¿Si ha contribuido a algo? ¿Si ha tenido, digamos, algún aporte?
Buenas. A ver, en todo el proceso que hemos llevado ha sido hasta el momento majestuoso, ya que la respuesta han sido muy positiva de acuerdo a la gente que se ha interesado por saber de fondo en qué consiste todo este ritual.
Listo. So far the process has been great and it has been very good, especially for the many people that have gotten interested in this process, the Saint Wake of the Virgin of Atocha, and what we do with it.
Toda esta forma ancestral ha tenido un fuerte acogimiento, ¿sí? O acogida, quizás porque realmente es algo que nos identifica, algo propio, muy territorial, que por el solo hecho de estar en otro territorio es menester guardar lo que realmente pensamos y sentimos.
This expression has been very important for us because it's an ancestral expression and it has allowed us to perpetuate our cultural traditions. And since we are in a different place now because we migrated, it's very important for us to keep these traditions alive.
Okay, and Willie wanted to answer this question, and Flora, if you want to chime in after, please feel free.
Buenos días a todos. Thanks for having us. So mariachi music in public consciousness already has, even within Mexico, both in the U.S. and in Mexico, there's an idea of what mariachi music is and the reality of what it is to us who are practitioners of the music. So, for example, la idea que la música de mariachi is, a group of musicians who play a certain set of songs, and the way ethnomusicology plays into this is, even within people who play the music, a lot of times we have to, if we're being conscious of what we're playing and what we're performing, to present it in its cultural context. For example, if we play a song in mariachi music that's from a different region outside of, say, Jalisco, right? So when we think of mariachi music, we think Jalisciense, that region of Mexico. Pero mariachi in itself is a collection of genres as opposed to one genre. And so a lot of times we incorporate musically old styles of playing that contemporary mariachis would deem as, an old style or a lesser style, just because it's not based in a more Western European idea of how we perform music today, right? And so a lot of times it's going back into doing research and pulling out old recordings or old styles, or interviewing older musicians, how they used to play certain things, and incorporating that into a contemporary ensemble or into the modern context, where a lot of younger musicians might not be familiar with a lot of it. So that's where I would say that we insert, or rather we take importance of what ethnomusicology does for preserving this music as both contemporary, but also the historical context of where it's from.
Thank you. I think that the case of mariachi music in the USA show us such tensions also between cultures. And I will come to this point, not only for your case, but I think every kind of intercultural contact produce a kind of tensions. And I'm wondering if this is always a typical case in ethnomusicology, that we are looking for tensions and for such kind of problems in the field, and how are you dealing with that in your research? You as researcher, and you also as informant or collaborator, or whatever you want to use this. Sure.
Oh man, so I think when I'm performing mariachi gigs and working with people whose daily life is mariachi strictly, I think I try to be really careful that I don't try to occupy the space of authority, because I feel like I'm learning every day. I go out, and in California, there's the oral tradition of the versions that everybody sort of learns by ear. And, I constantly have to balance that with what I'm teaching at school, where students aren't in that context to learn it by ear, or I'm still learning it. And I think in terms of the intercultural connections and tensions, there are, in some ways, I think it's good to sort of push back on some stereotypes. And I also think that despite how some people might feel that, mariachi is the only thing that gets attention for the Spanish-speaking world, in this LA context, right? There are so many types of music and immigrant communities whose music is not represented and not even talked about in the curriculum. And so I receive a lot of students who want something beyond what they have offered, and mariachi is the closest thing. So like I have a student who's pursuing studying Filipino music and has used the approach of mariachi in schools as a model for that. And to bring it back to the other two presentations, I think that, without having this work with ethnomusicologists, with communities, and having materials there for people to learn from, it's really hard to make it present and decolonize an educational context without that awareness, that research, those materials, summarized in a way where you have a door opening for people. So,
do you want to add something, Agenor or Ari or Juan?
I am okay with that, and we have some questions in the chat. I don't understand, Julio.
Yes, we have some question for you and for you three. The first one for you, Agenor, Rino Suarez. I am intrigued by the music instruments women visual band. It's been said if they make eye contact with the instrument, they may get ill and die. And I was wondering if the ban is to protect the woman from ultimately dying, or they ban them because women can do harm to the music or jurupari. I am not sure if this does make a lot of sense, but I wanted to know, in the light of the ban, how they see women at the party music or the community.
Okay, I try to answer this question. This is a good question, Rino. Thank you. So this is a long history. And the first times the woman that conduce these rituals, but for some reason that I not mind all the points of this history. The woman lost the jurupari control, and the man catch the jurupari control. And the word we know now, it's a protection for the last word we have. So the woman cannot see this instrument because she had the chance and not provide the correct comportament, not provide the correct act in use the flute. So the men now have the flute. This is a polemic point because we can in a machismo perspective, or this case, I not don't mind this discussion about the genre, but it's a fecundal, it's a delicate point in this history. But the second question I have to, it's the linked with the one question, Beatriz Herrera,
yeah.
Yeah.
The role of these women, yeah. The role of the women in the parties and their access to music knowledge experience.
Okay. In the Kushimawara case, this is a popular song. We have the presence of all of the communities, all people of the communities, children, women, men, and others. All are invited to this step of the day-by-day ritual, But when we have a separate space to the jurupari and the secret rituals, but we had two ways of make music in these communities. This is a invitation music that all the person can get in. In the past times, this is related with the jurupari cariço flute. This is the flute that connects invited people to the dance. So the Kushimawara is connected to this kind of the rituals. This is a public domain, but this is the woman. It's very important to this this celebration, because they named this part of ritual the change of the dams, the change of the things. You know, this is the time to make marriage. So this is a ritual for connect the various communities. So in this sense, I think I try to answer some points, but we have to know that a visual band with the Jurupari flutes that continues in some kind of old woman's that they should not see the amplifying sound system, you know. This is the continue that's important in my presentation. But we had a study of the pattern of the role of the woman in this for better answer.
I think this is a very important point, and maybe you can see Rino and Beatriz, you can see or looking for Rita Segato's work. She's writing about this relationship between a low intensity patriarchal structure in indigenous societies and patriarchal structures in capitalism. I think this is a very important point for this question. And we have also question for Juan Sebastián. There is a question for Juan Sebastián from Juan Eduardo Wolf. Is the rosary sung or executed with music? You can see something about that, Juan Sebastián?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Juan. This is actually an important question because it helps us clarify what the ritual setting is. You know, like the arrullo music, the one that is performed with drums, is the main activity throughout the night. It lasts all night, and the drums are supposed to be grooving for some 6 to 7 or 8 hours sometimes, but this is not continuous, you know, because the ritual has some steps, right? So one of these steps is the rosary. So the rosary is another form of oral expression, but it's not sung, right? Rosaries are just recitados. How would you say that in English? Sorry, I'm missing the word right now. Recited, thank you. Recited, spoken, right? So it's a very normal rosary setting, and this happens in the middle of the night. But then after that, the loudness begins again. So is this like a tension release kind of dynamic all night long, where there's moments of a lot of outwards loud expression and outward sociability, but there's no dance. You know, it's not that much outwards. You know. So, but it's very expressive and explicit and loud. It's a closed room and there are drums banging, so there's no way you don't pay attention, right? But this is only a part of the night. You know, the ritual also manages the energy in some moments where the expected ritual behavior is completely different. You're supposed to be silent, introspective. After all, it's a religious celebration. There are moments in which, after chanting all these hours to Virgin of Atocha, there are moments where you don't chant out, but you know, you just pray to the inside. So there's this very diametrical balance between introspection and expression throughout the night. And this is very carefully constructed throughout the different expressive and affective and performance mechanisms that are carried out throughout the Saint Wake night.
Thank you. We have other question for you. Let me see. From Ioannis Christidis, I would like to listen to what would be your answer to the question you have set at the end of the presentation, or if I would shape it in my own words. Do the people who participate in these performances actually experience the cultural musical identification, shaping them as a prerequisite for their political empowerment, inclusion, and representation, or how exactly this empowerment is actualized? do the participation in musical performances becomes a bridge to active engagement in wider political realms?
Cultural. Thank you. I think this is a great question for Arturo.
Claro que sí. A nivel distrital hemos participado con todo este ritual donde es un enriquecimiento total, muy ancestral, muy identitario, donde las otras personas han querido de pronto valorar porque saben que es propiamente de nuestro propio territorio.
Of course, yes, we have had a lot of experiences of people actually participating and engaging profoundly in this ritual because they know and they acknowledge that this is something that comes from our territory. ¿Hay algo más? No? I would like to compliment Arturo's response by saying that this empowerment, yes, of course, this is only a 13 minutes presentation. There's a lot packed in there. And thank you, because that is a great question. We need to connect this ritual with the actual political and social empowerment. You're absolutely right. And the way that happens is because these rituals were the, how would you say that? Like the beginning, like the first meetings that later became formalized schools for cultural training, right? So like Arturo's organization, Candombleo y Color, is a formalized organization, right? So this is a form of empowerment because this formalization actually enables these leaders to write proposals and get grant money. So yes, the question I was making at the end was, okay, so what is it really? You know, is it something like for the people? Is it like their ritual that they feel very deeply and that is very important for constructing elastic identities, like we argued? Or is it just, you know, another display of multicultural cultural policy, you know, that wants to be inclusive and just display all kinds of cultural acts? I'm seeing more questions. I don't know if they're addressed at responding to the things that I'm saying, but I will just continue with the explanation. The way these schools work and they start getting funding, you know, and this has not only happened with Arturo. There are several other leaders that have done similar things through patron saint celebration processes in Bogotá. So this is one great example because it has worked very well, but there are other examples through which these ancestral rituals end up turning into cultural training schools in neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods and in public schools for children, mostly for Afro-Colombian children, but not only for Afro-Colombian children. So this visibility of cultural leaders such as Arturo in the cultural environment of cultural organizations and the cultural secretaries actually enables them to gain political, cultural representation within the city. And many of these leaders have participated in wider city councils that pertain Afro-Colombian culture. So it definitely is a way of, or has been a way, you know, for these people, these communities to actually gather enough political agency in a way to speak directly to the city government.
The topic on knowledge transmission, I think is a good link to come to Jesse. We have also some question for Jesse. Natalia Giraldo's question is, I really like the presentation of Jesse and the other persons. I found it very interesting how she has connected the ethnomusicological question with the ethno-racial discussions in the Latin situation in the USA. I think it has been an interesting way of landing the experience that we're look for when you talk about decoloniality. And then comes something of Spanish, sobre todo, ¿cuál es el aporte frente a la discusión de la decolonidad?
And todavía es muy temprano para mí. Aporte, like, how would you describe?
Aporte.
Aporte, like the...
Like support.
Pues the jargon of yeah.
Right. Let's see. So I think that in a university context, educational context, you know, we're already in a formal sort of colonized context, but in order to push beyond and rethink it, I think oftentimes we have to start with adding new or overlooked or excluded or silenced material to what we're teaching. And so I do think that in that way, being able to offer multiple ensembles or classes that can cover, topics that don't get discussed about. I mean, in my K-12 education and a lot of my college education, I don't think I ever really learned about South America, let alone, much about Mexico, especially growing up in New York. So there are huge knowledge gaps there. I think this also connects to Christian's question, which I saw later, with asking about the teaching of it, like the pedagogy, right? And I think that that's another level of thinking about decolonizing that we can work on, that I try to embrace in my teaching. I'm sure Willie can talk about that in his context of teaching in students across the Southwest. But I know I try to blend in the oral tradition of teaching by ear, working on students' oral skills. I try to make sure students are multilingual in understanding. In mariachi, you say primera, segunda, tercera for the chord names, but it's really the tonic, the 5 chord or 5/7 usually, and the 4 chord. And then our performance contexts, we get called to perform for retirement parties and on campus. And I try to make our performances a safe space for students to get that step out where they might not know every song, but they have to learn how to follow and they have to learn how to transpose. And so I carefully pick students who I know can follow, or it might be their first performance like this, and guide them through it. So I try and break out of this model of rehearse all semester and have one concert in the best way I can. And so I don't know if Willie or Flora want to add.
Well, I just like to add too, a lot of times for this music to be accepted as part of curriculum, we have to submit music and some of the ways we're going to write the pedagogy of it, the ways we're going to teach these things as they pertain to a Western classical music context, but it doesn't necessarily fall into that, right? So a lot of the oral transmission of it, a lot of the transposition on the spot, it's kind of hard to get departments to accept that. And so we have to sort of shift the way we teach in order to fit that formula. But in practice, usually what we'll do is we'll just teach the way we teach. I teach a small community group on the west side of Los Angeles, and it's an umbrella. It's part of an umbrella program where there's an orchestra involved. So luckily, in my experience, we have a little bit more leeway. But it's something that often when we go to festivals, right, we have to deal with rubrics for, say, competitions, right, which again is problematic because it's very subjective into what people deem as musically viable, right, and so it's kind of that struggle of, okay, we have to talk the talk in order to be able to be allowed to walk the walk, to teach this music. Sometimes it's just navigating that is difficult, and explaining why it's important is difficult.
On like the student side, I would like to kind of add that having programs like this kind of allows students to actually decolonize their own lives as well, because a lot of people that are involving themselves in the program maybe had no experience with mariachi or anything in their cultural heritage previously. So their involvement in the mariachi here kind of allows them to have some kind of link to what may have been lost over the years, for many reasons. But it gives them kind of a little window into what they could have missed out on.
Thank you. I want to ask Arturo for the same topic, because Arturo's association is also offering courses in Bogota, and I wanted to know if you, Arturo, think that your courses are, in a way, contribute to fight against racism in Bogota and discrimination from migrants. Estaba diciendo Arturo que creo que también es una pregunta que vale para ti, que ustedes ofrecen cursos en Bogotá, entonces me pregunto también en qué medida tú consideras que los cursos que dan, las presentaciones que hacen, contribuyen a que se combata el racismo en Bogotá, que como todos sabemos, Bogotá es un país multirracial, lo cual no quiere decir que no sea un país racista, ¿no?
Sí, está no cierto. A pesar de que es tan notoria la discriminación, nosotros a través de los talleres pedagógicos que hacemos inicialmente con con nuestro propio grupo y luego lo hacemos con los grupos de los mestizos, que son también mis propios estudiantes, donde ellos son partícipes de de toda esta pedagogía.
Should I translate that, Julio, or do you?
You are the host.
I'm the official translator. So through the workshops and pedagogical trainings and events that we create, we make sure that everybody gets involved, including mestizo population, not just Afro-Colombian population. So Arturo is basically telling us that this is a way of creating inclusivity in the ensembles.
Sí, desde estos talleres, justamente cuando nosotros sembramos en cada niño, en cada estudiante, esa fuerza de querer acercarse un poco más al aspecto identitario. Es decir, damos valores muy importantes frente a ese pensamiento afrodescendiente que día a día ha sido un poco aislado o discriminado.
So we try to teach our students, and especially the children, we try to sow in them the seed of strength and force of cultural identity. So what we do is we try to teach them what it means to have a cultural identity, the strength of heritage and what it does. And of course, this is me talking now. Of course, not every student is Afro-Colombian. You know, there's also mestizo population that is catered by Arturo's program, but it's precisely that way of understanding interculturality, or the way maybe Jesse and crew were saying, a way of getting back in touch with your own lost heritage, right? I think actually that was Flora that was mentioning that. So, yes. ¿Algo más?
I would like to talking about it, Julio.
Yeah,
if I can.
yeah.
Okay.
Of course,
in the Kushimawara case, we not have a formal situation for learning Kushimawara music. We are face a other kind of musician. In the case of when Ari said that when we start the research in the past, no one talking about Kushimawara, they are talking about racism, because in São Gabriel, everybody knows what Kushimawara is, but only few peoples recognize it like an indigenous musician. In the Brazilian context, we are face a upper set system. So in this case, we are trying to demonstrate we are in an agenda of decolonization, because we are talking about what they don't want we talking about. We are face a musician that not is recognized by the musicians, by the conservatorial musicians, and neither for the anthropological academic context. You know, this is a rebel music in these all contexts. So we are in an agenda in this point of the view. We try to disperting, we try to instigating the view of the young indigenous, to try to make music in your terms. We don't have, but we have a dream that continue it. We had a formal situation for legal protections. It's not. We don't have nothing against that, but let me try ask Ari about this. Ari, só uma pergunta, cara. Só uma pergunta aqui para a gente entrar aqui no contexto. Eles perguntam, e a gente está falando aqui sobre como essas músicas, tanto a música da Colômbia quanto os mariachis lá do México com os Estados Unidos, como a nossa música Cuximauara aqui, ela luta contra o preconceito, contra indígenas. Tu tem alguma coisa para falar sobre isso? Tu poderia falar?
Parece um preconceito, mas eu não vejo muito por esse lado, não, porque quando a gente está fazendo a festa lá no interior, lá na cidade onde nasci, geralmente tem pessoas de outros estados que residem lá ou que estão lá simplesmente por passagem. Quando essa pessoa chega numa festa daquela, vê uma música diferente, um jeito de dançar totalmente diferente, ele fica... comenta alguma coisa a respeito da música, a respeito da dança, tal. Então não digo que seja tipo um preconceito, mas não sei colocar direito uma palavra para isso, mas é mais ou menos isso.
Entendo. When Ari said that when they are in the all communities, in the community context, no have a racism. They don't see in this way, because this is a political discussions in the field. This surge in different ways. We have to explore in different ways. A direct answer, a direct ask like that. But we are in São Gabriel da Cachoeira city are the most militarized city in the Brazil too. So we have a very racism in the city. When I got to research Cuximauara songs, the people in the city asked me, wow, Cuximauara, does really exist? Like a negation of my object of research. Let's go, Julio.
Thank you, Agenor. I think...
Your mic closed, Julio.
Sorry. I think in every society is a different situation, but I can comment from Peru. For example, the university or the music university in Lima is including traditional music from Peru since 5 or 6 years ago. But I noticed that the music they are teaching there is only music which is compatible with classic music aesthetics. And I think this is a dangerous way sometimes, because it's a kind of inclusion which is excluding many forms of traditional music, many forms of popular music. There is a lot, for other example is Música de Maestros in Bolivia, for example, who play in a format like chamber music. They play only traditional music, but in a chamber music format. It's also a way. We have now question for Juan and Agenor from Natalia Giraldo. She said, how do you think you are perceived in those spaces in which you have developed your research? Would you say you are perceived as white men who are going to investigate communities understood as exotic, or what is your perception?
Juan, what do you start? Or
Sorry, I was translating I was in silence because I was translating here for Arturo. I mean, I think this is a great question, for example, to discuss the issue of representation, you know, because I'm being asked how I feel that I'm being perceived. But I think that is a great question for Arturo, who's the one that perceives me, you know. I do not want to answer that question if Arturo is here to answer the question, you know. So going on with the idea of decolonization, representation, where voices emerge, where voices are flowing, how dialogue meets and all that. I think it's very important to not forget that we are co-presenting with our collaborators, and they are here to contribute themselves to this large conversation. That's the whole point.
Arturo puede responder, por supuesto.
Entonces, profe, la pregunta es que me están preguntando a mí que es cómo me percibo yo en los espacios en los que hago investigación. Entonces la vamos a voltear. Es cómo me percibiría usted a mí. La pregunta para mí concreta es si yo diría que si se me percibe como un hombre blanco que va a investigar comunidades entendidas como exóticas, ¿sí? Entonces, ¿usted cómo diría cómo me percibiría a mí? No voy a escuchar.
No, para nosotros la pigmentación de piel no tiene mucho que ver en el pensamiento de su proceso investigativo, ya que para nosotros es bienvenido que otros se enteren, se empapen de todo lo que realmente en el interior pensamos o hacemos.
For us, the skin color pigmentation is not important for the conduction of research because what is important is what we do, how we feel, and that we respect each other. ¿Algo más?
La Cátedra de Estudio Afrocolombiano nos enseña que al otro hay que saberlo recibir, aceptar tal y cual como es, especialmente como persona.
The Afro-Colombian Studies Chair, which is a chair of studies here in Colombia, teaches us that we need to respect everybody and treat everybody as a person and with respect.
Okay.
Thank you. Agenor, do you want to say something about that? Or
okay,
do you want to ask Ari?
Yeah, I will ask Ari. Ari, fica atento aí que eu já vou fazer uma pergunta. But I can say to you that in my field work, I was named by Kariwa. Kariwa is the name to the indigenous name. Baré specifically is indigenous name to a white man, but it's not. It's Kariwa. It's a word that a white man that the man different for the community. Ari, como eu estava falando para eles que vocês me chamavam de Kariwa, né? O que é que essa parada significa, né? E como é que vocês veem assim um Kariwa?
O Kariwa, a gente lá na região, geralmente te chama pessoas de outro estado, de outro país que chega lá para visitar. É como se chamasse o cara de gringo, entendeu? Então chama de Kariwa.
Okay, I think everyone got the gringo word. Kariwa, it's a gringo for the indigenous word, you know? This is a person of other states, but this includes other characteristics that I know. A man that not know to fishing, a man that not know to dance, and have to learn these kinds of community things, you know. Obrigado, Ari.
I think this is very important to keep in mind that such categories like white or indigenous are not racial categories, but cultural and social categories. And we can assume a different role independently how our skin color is. I think it is very important to remember that we construct such categories. There are not white men, there are not indigenous, there are not Africans, Americans, and so on. We construct such categories in the social interaction. We have very philosophical question for the end, and these questions are for all participants of this dialogue. Rodrigo Cordeiro is asking, why is a folk song more human than a symphony music? The oral and rhythm way to connect with music. The second question is, as a result of social culture, how music has the power to give voice to the other who doesn't have a voice. And the last one, the knowledge and the meaning of the videos and sounds are coming from the cultural industry. What makes in our education and ethics what it means. So I think it's really a big
This
question.
is a philosophical.
This is a kind of philosophical question, and I'm not sure if a folk song is more human than a symphony. I don't know, but I wanted to know what do you say to this question?
Is it okay if we jump in first, or?
Of course.
So I think in thinking about the mariachi context, I think there's a certain level of familiarity and way that people may participate that they come knowing, or, there's ways that we can make it inviting where, I played classical music first and I identify with it just as much, but at the same time, when my students' parents come to the concerts or, and we can get them singing along, I think there's a certain level of breaking that space in having that type of nostalgia or familiarity or just invitation to participate that makes it a little bit, I think, like easy to kind of relax in. I don't know if you want to add to that, Willie. Or...
Yeah. Sometimes depending on the type of performance, you're not encouraged to participate. You're not, you're part of the audience, and that's your role as a person in the audience versus you go to, if you're at a backyard party or you're at a concert where they're singing a ranchera, right? Volver, 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 right? And everyone participates. So I think it. I would agree that it's not more human, but I would agree that it's a lot more inviting and a lot more less what's the word? Less restrictive, right? So you're not cast in some role as the performer versus the audience. You're part of the experience.
Participation is very important, and classical music had other form of participation. You listen to the music, but you are not playing the music at the same time. Juan Sebastián, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, thank you. I was pretty much just going to agree with Jesse and Willie. I think that the way in which music can give voice to other people is through participation. And of course, not every music is participatory, right? So maybe that's where the difference lies between the symphony orchestra and the folk ensemble or whatever, but it's participation. I think that's why I tried to emphasize during my part of the presentation the idea of participation, and so did Arturo, because precisely just breaking that boundary between the passive audience and the active performer and having everybody just be part of the same thing. You don't know if you're a performer or your audience. Sometimes you're one, sometimes you're the other. You transition into the other, sometimes you're in between. So I think this is what actually enables, at least in our case, the goal of bonding and creating community. There are many other ways of creating some kind of social impact through music, but this is one specifically that pertains to this specific case. So I think active participation is fundamental if what you want is to actually give people voice through music. And in that same line, following the line of questioning, now that we're talking about the last question talks about the cultural industry, right? I would say that, for example, the case that we presented here is very specific in that regard, because in the last 10 years, Afro-Colombian music from the Pacific region has gotten way more visible at the national level, but specifically through the emerging independent music industry. So the view that people in Bogota have from music from the Pacific Coast, Afro-Colombian music from the Pacific Coast, is mostly through concerts, gigs, shows, CDs, festivals that the city produces and invites artists there. But there's actually not a lot being spoken about how these rituals happen in Bogota as well. So music from Afro-Colombian music from the Pacific Coast in Bogota is not just show. It's not just show business, you know? There are communities perpetuating these traditions and making them functional the way they have been for centuries.
Thank you, Juan Sebastián. It's a very, very important point. We have a lot of agents who are working in the music industry, and this is very important to recognize that the music industry is not only the majors, but also many independent labels who are producing music from minorities, for example. Agenor, do you have something to add to the question?
Okay, I can try. In the case of how the music give voice to the people, I think this is put on certain colonization view or colonization perspective, because who are we to give voice to somebody? I don't know, but I think this is the music in the Kushimawara context. It's a kind of it's not controlled by the industry of music. It's not controlled for this, and at the contrary, we had an answer to this big of structure that molds ourselves. I don't know. I think for this point of view, I don't know, because this is a philosophical question. This is deeper to my easy English. I'm sorry. So I would like to say more, but I can't.
Thank you, Agenor. We don't have more questions. There is something what you want to add, Jesse, Willy, or Flora, Juan Sebastián, or Arturo, Agenor, and Ari?
I think I want to add something about who doesn't have voice or power, something to that point. And just to reiterate that there are a lot of students that come through and who don't have music they identify with represented in the curriculum. And so sometimes, I have students who are into Oaxacan music, norteño music, all these other regional styles that have not been popularized the same way historically through the cultural industry of film, for example, like mariachi. So mariachi dominates in a way that comes off as unfair in a lot of spaces to people. And when I have students who have that experience or that interest, I try to make sure they can form combos and still perform at the concert and still find ways to be as inclusive and use this space as a way to keep branching out as much as I can. I don't know if you wanted to talk about the cultural industry or.
Well, actually, I wanted to add to Juan's point about the way music's popularized and the people's access to music. And I think as musicians, sometimes we need to be very very conscious about how that music is being transmitted, right? How these traditions, these contexts are being transmitted through music, and just being aware that a lot of the ways we learn music is by listening and imitating. And so being really aware of, the aesthetics, right? The cultural aesthetics of the music. And I guess it would be sort of like playing with an accent versus playing con gusto de la cultura. And I just thought it was really interesting that question was brought up. I think it's really important that part of the transmission of this music, is our platforms as musicians, and that's how we have power. We have power over it, but we also have responsibility to it, to make sure that we're doing it in the best way we can.
Thank you. Very important also to remember that minorities are claiming for their right to speak and to think. We don't need to give a voice for other persons or other cultures. They have a voice and they use these voices in order to express their values or cultural items. Juan Sebastián, something if you want to add something, we are coming to the end of our discussion. Agenor, if you want to add something.
I just would like to thank you for the opportunity, and I try to say here how the Kushimawara music transmit this knowledge. You know, I in the superficial ethnographic layer, I was in the I won for Hopari, but after years, I try to understand it's not a ritual, one ritual, two rituals that you learn. You have to experience this 1 year, 2 years to understand that in the deeper layers, I wore face to the Jurupari teachings. You know, this is only final words. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Then I want also to thank Juan Sebastián, Jesse, and Agenor for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I want also to thank ICTM for giving us this space to speak about music and about our research in a way that we construct. And I want also to thank Soy Bentan and also Salwa for presenting the group. And I want also to thank our audience for the questions and for participating in this discussion. Thank you very much for being there, and have a good time.